A Study in Magic by Books of Change. Chapter 19. Braving the Alley. Lestrade was having breakfast with his family when the owl came. He ruined his undershirt spewing tea when the tawny bird of prey, which shouldn't even be about in daylight, wasn't that the whole point of owls? Swooped in from their open window and dropped a heavy parchment envelope with a wax seal on the dining table. "Bird! Bird!" chirped Rupert, pointing at the owl. "Owl!" cried Martin, his eyes as wide as saucers. "Real owl!" Baby Elise burbled inside her playpen. Julia was the only one who didn't look excited, and the mail was addressed to her. Lestrade regarded at the envelope apprehensively. Ellen stared at it and wouldn't move from where she was cleaning up Rupert. At length both Lestrade and Ellen moved to reach out for it. They paused at the same time, hoping the other would get it. When neither of them did, Ellen sighed and took it herself. Ellen made a series of odd faces as she studied the purple wax seal bearing a coat of arms. A lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake surrounding a large letter H. "Draco dormiens nunquam titilandus," said Ellen, reading the Latin motto on the bottom of the crest. "What is that supposed to mean?" Lestrade moved and hovered over Ellen's shoulder. Julia crept silently next to her and stood on her tiptoes. The three of them read the letter together. Lestrade felt the need to sit down. When he reached the second page was listed the required school equipment. "A wand," Lestrade repeated. "A freaking wand! And a cauldron!" "Potion kits and standard book of spells," Ellen said hollowly. "What even is this?" Julia said nothing. She seemed to shrink into herself. Lestrade noticed and squared his shoulders. "Courage, Greg." "Okay," he said. "This is what we're going to do. I'm going to call John, and Ellen is going to talk to Jack. We'll figure out how to buy this stuff. If either objects, and my bet is on Sherlock, I'm publishing John's marriage story." "That's mean," said Ellen, even as she betrayed her amusement by the touching of her lips. Drastic plots require drastic measures," said Lestrade firmly. Lestrade prepared for work afterwards. Julia and the kids were dropped off at Jackie's as usual, except Ellen and Elise joined them too. Ellen having decided to have a long talk with Jackie due to the exceptional circumstances. Lestrade brandished Julia's Hogwarts letter in lieu of a greeting. Mr. Shin regarded the letter in wordless and mournful distaste before beckoning them inside. Jackie's twin brothers, Jeremy and Jason, were in the parlor. There was nothing noticeably different about the way they dressed or looked, except they were holding long, polished wooden sticks. "About time," said Jeremy, looking impeccable and effeminate as always, as in his designer's suit. "Have you sent a reply yet?" asked Jason, who, unlike his twin, was in his perennial cargo trousers, raggy old t-shirt, and black socks. "Why?" Lestrade double-checked the letter. Sure enough, there was an RSVP requirement written in the last paragraph. "Didn't think so," said Jason lightly. "I'll shoot an owl. It's a yes, right?" "Yeah, sure," said Lestrade, shaking his head. "Owls, in the freaking broad daylight. Not very discreet, isn't it?" "Don't give me that look. It's what British magicals use," grumbled Jeremy. "We use ravens or magpies in SK." "Use a bloody dodo if you have to. Just do it," growled Lestrade. "Actually, dodos are a magical bird called Titico," said Jackie, whilst gliding into the parlor. Lestrade closed his eyes and covered his face. "Fatal error. System overloaded. Shutting down." Jeremy and Jason chuckled, and Jackie smiled benignly as she guided Ellen into the airy living room. "I'll call you later," said Jackie. "Please reboot yourself by then." "I'll make no promises," said Lestrade, and he left. He went through the day distracted and out of sorts. Criminals kept doing irritatingly illegal things throughout London, and people kept getting killed in fits of passion or stupidity. Lestrade vowed if he had to dig out an abandoned baby in a skip and find whoever did this ever again, he was going to consider early retirement or a career change, and he meant it this time. The nadir moment was calling John in the men's toilet between meetings, asking where the bloody heck is he supposed to go to buy a fucking cauldron in London. "You have to go to the Leaky Cauldron," said John. "Are you talking about the pub in Johnny Gross?" Lestrade asked in inadvisedly loud volumes. "I've been going there on and off for years. Don't tell me I can order a cauldron with a side of fish and chips." John was silent for a moment. "I'll meet you there next Wednesday," said John, and then hung up. Lestrade left his stall, muttering a bane upon John Watson's head, and found Anderson standing before a urinal. They stared at each other for a long, awkward moment. Secret code? Anderson guessed. I neither confirm nor deny. Lestrade evaded. Anderson pulled a face. Must be nice to have a harem. Unable to think an answer for that comment, Lestrade just returned to his office. He should have realized Anderson speculating his love life would inevitably lead to Donovan hearing about it, which in turn meant everyone in Serious Crimes would know in 24 minutes. After Gregson ragged him about the unspeakable things he was doing with Scotland Yard's pain in the backside's better half, Lestrade gave in and bought 2 sugared donuts from the nearby corner shop and washed them down with a large overpriced, over-sugared latte from Starbucks. He was leaning back into his chair feeling disgusting and obese when someone knocked at his office door. He didn't recognize him. One of the uniforms, perhaps? Hello, he said a tad awkwardly. Mind if I interrupt? Lestrade shook his head, bewildered. Unknown shut his office door behind him. Got a phone call from Dr. Watson? Said Unknown quietly. I'm Alfred Thomas. My stepson goes to Hogwarts. Tremendous relief spread inside Lestrade's chest. He decided the next time he saw Joan, he was going to kiss her on the mouth. After spending the precautionary amount of serious discussion time, Lestrade and Alfred went out for a break and bonded. How do you deal with this? Lestrade grumbled. Hell if I know, Alfred grumbled back. When I married Gracie, Dean came as part of the package. I didn't even know something was different about him until the deputy headmistress visited us in person. If someone asks, I tell them Dean got a scholarship to go to a boarding school up in Scotland and wiggle my eyebrows suggestively. As if to demonstrate, Alfred wiggled his eyebrows. They moved like anorexic caterpillars that suffered a stroke. Mine got hers from her mum, said Lestrade. Do you suppose people would believe me if I said her family is paying for their education? That should be fine, said Alfred. Got any other kids? That should be fine, said Alfred. Got any other kids? 2 sons and a baby girl. They'll have siblings. Might have a bit of trouble with jealousy, Alfred warned. None of the kids I had with Gracie has the gift, and they're dead envious of Dean. We had to break a few fights, and really put the foot down on the teasing. Lestrade filed that in his head. Right. They moved to the topic of school costs. Lestrade winced at the amount Alfred had to spend to buy everything last year, and winced even more when Alfred moaned about wizards not taking credit cards. Have you seen the book list? Alfred complained. A whole set of new books just for one class. They better be worth it. Lestrade remembered the books by Gilderoy Lockhart and let out a soul-wrenching sigh. Don't you get a feeling it's going to be one of those classes? You know, the ones where the teacher makes the students buy all his books? They grumbled some more. Then after promising each other to go out for drinks, Lestrade returned to the bullpen. Roger Bradstreet intercepted him on the way. Why were you talking to Al from traffic? Lestrade decided to stick to the truth. His kid goes to the same boarding school Julia got accepted to. We did an info swap. Roger's hairline went up. Since when were you planning to send your kid to boarding school? Not my idea. My grandpa's arranging everything. Is that right? Said Roger. How are you going to pay for it? Or is he paying? Scholarship, said Lestrade, the lies coming up quite easily since that talk with Alfred. Julia's very bright, you know. She made it to the bonus round in the primary's maths challenge last February. His broad smile faded a bit when he remembered Hogwarts didn't offer maths in their curriculum. Blast. Good things you didn't get in your brains, yeah? Grinned Roger. I say that all the time. Lestrade agreed. Wednesday dawned too early for Lestrade's peace of mind. Lestrade finished his half-day late, as usual, so he phoned Jack to tell her that he would meet them at the Leaky Cauldron. Jack said, okay. What's wrong? Asked Lestrade. Jeremy and Jason want to take magical transport as part of the orientation, Jack explained. I find magical transport unpleasant. Can't you guys take the bus? Lestrade asked. There's nothing wrong with flu, Jeremy shouted in the background. And it's so much cheaper, Jason hollered. Jackie let out a little sigh. Juliet, darling, don't cling to me like that. My hand is going numb. Daddy, I want to take the bus, Julia whined. Julia, you can't do anything without taking risks, Jason chided. I'll take them when I get there, Julia muttered. Not with that kind of attitude you won't, said Jeremy. No, just follow my example. Jackie let out another sigh. I'll see you there. If something goes wrong, I'm going to kill your brothers, said Lestrade seriously. You'll never find the bodies. You'll just have to hold a funeral with empty caskets. Sure, go ahead, said Jackie lightly, as if Lestrade didn't threaten premeditated murder. Then she ended the call. Lestrade arrived at the Leaky Cauldron in a few minutes. He found his father-in-law at the huge fireside with his hands clasped behind his back. He was as expressionless as always and looked quite distinguishing in his linen three-piece suit. Jeremy and Jason were there too in their usual attire, and they were staring impatiently at the burning flames like they were waiting for Father Christmas to drop down the chimney or something. Suddenly, the small orange fire turned green and as tall as a person, and Jackie stumbled out of the flames. "Wait, weren't you going to send Julia first?" asked Jason as he got his sister. Lestrade stopped his instinctive blue streak as fear overtook his veins. "What do you mean you sent her first? Where's Julia?" he roared. Jeremy looked uneasy. "Oh, maybe she went one grade too far." Fear turned into panic. "The right... What? What the... is going on?" A few people gasped at his language. Lestrade didn't care. Jason made placating gestures. "Wizards travel via fireplace with this thing called flue powder," Jason explained. "You throw the stuff into the fire, speak your destination, step into the fire, and you get there. This is Julia's first time, so she might have got out of the wrong fireplace. You know, like getting off the wrong bus stop. Nuna, did she speak clearly?" Jackie finally got to her feet, still looking rather ashen. "She stuttered." Jeremy and Jason looked stricken. Lestrade whipped out his phone to call Julia. He yelped when he found it was leaking smoke. His stomach churning, blood running cold, and heart galloping, Lestrade turned around to run out to the streets. Mr. Shin slapped a sheet of paper on his stomach, and suddenly Lestrade was unable to move. Then Mr. Shin said something harsh-sounding to his sons in his native tongue. Jason and Jeremy, who were at least a foot taller than their tiny father, cowered as he berated them at length. "He says, 'You two are idiots. I can't believe you came out of my loins, and if we don't find my granddaughter in an hour, I'm going to eviscerate you,'" translated Jackie helpfully. Lestrade would have clapped if he could move, or was less hysterical. Several patrons rose up and offered to go look for poor Julia. Tom, the barkeep, said he'd make some fire calls. "What was that?" and alert his fellow shopkeepers to keep an eye out. Meanwhile, Mr. Shin pulled out a wad of rice paper. He made an imperious gesture over them, and immediately the sheets folded themselves into aeroplanes in midair. The aeroplanes then flew out the bar through the back door like a flock of attacking birds. "Trucking spill," said Mr. Shin flatly. "When they find her, they will show me where she is." Only then did Mr. Shin remove the sheet of paper on Lestrade. Lestrade felt the paralysis leave him, and he almost concussed himself as he collapsed to the floor. Jackie ushered him into a chair. Tom immediately came over with a cup of tea. "Or would you like something stronger?" asked Tom as he handed the cup over. "Don't give it to him," said a voice that made Lestrade want to scream. "He has a bad history with whiskey." Sherlock sauntered into view, followed by John and Harry. Lestrade grit his teeth to prevent himself from saying what he wanted to do to Sherlock in extremely graphic terms. "That would be highly ambitious of you," said Sherlock haughtily to his unspoken words. "Marriage story," Lestrade threatened. "I'm going to do it." "You wouldn't dare," Sherlock growled. "Girls, calm down," said John. "What's going on? What happened?" Jackie explained the situation. Lestrade noticed his father-in-law didn't spare a glance at the new arrivals and just waited for his enchanted paper airplanes to alert him back or whatever, remaining calm, expressionless, and at a soldierly rest. It made Lestrade want to salute. "Flue powder," John muttered darkly. "Nasty stuff. Felt like I was spinning down a drain the last time I tried." "You used the flute network?" asked Jackie, sounding surprised. "Yeah, had to pick up Harry from his friend's house. Worse than sight-along apparition, and that was pretty bad too." Suddenly Mr. Shin made a minute move, like a tiger picking a scent of potential prey. "Masks, blood-covered playing cards, a withered hand, a black cabinet, and a large stone fireplace," he muttered, staring at the darkness. "I have not seen this place before." Harry looked alert. "I think I know where it is." Lestrade was on him in an instant. "Take me there!" John grabbed his shoulder. "Let Harry take care of it. Magic isn't something you approach half-cocked." Lestrade glared. "You can't tell me to—" "Don't go, Greg," said Mr. Shin quietly. "There are many things that you do not yet understand, but believe me, I will not allow evil to befall my granddaughter if I can help it. Nor to you." To Harry he said, "Go, my talisman will protect you." Mr. Shin flicked another sheet of rice paper, and it neatly folded itself into a butterfly. It flapped to Harry's shoulder and rested there, its delicate paper wings fluttering. Harry nodded and made his way to the back door. Lestrade fretted as the small black-haired figure wearing a tweed jacket, short trousers, and navy blue keds vanished. "I couldn't just," said Lestrade, unable to take it anymore.
"Do not make me do this again,"
said Mr. Shin, waving the rice paper he'd slapped on Lestrade earlier in a threatening way.
"I will do it if it means you will not charge blindly to harm."
Lestrade calculated the odds of him ducking around his father-in-law and catching up on Harry. Apparently sensing his thoughts, Mr. Shin furrowed his long, thin eyebrows.
"It will follow after you like a homing missile,"
he warned. Lestrade slumped back into his chair and covered his face. Traitors. Vipers. The lot of them. Harry ducked into a narrow cul-de-sac hidden behind several wooden crates at the edge of Diagon Alley and wrapped his invisibility cloak around him. Harry never left without it, not since Sherlock used it to break into the Bank of England. When he emerged a few cautionary minutes later, Harry quietly made his way to the sparsely lit streets in the opposite direction of Gringotts Bank. It got darker and dingier as Harry walked further in. He checked the old wooden street sign hanging above a shop selling poisonous candles. It said Nocturne Alley. Harry walked heel-toe and kept his glance firmly forward. He passed two shabby-looking wizards muttering to each other from the shadow of a doorway, and an aged witch carrying a tray of human fingernails. He recognized the shop that had a cage full of live, gigantic black spiders. Further down the alleyway was the largest shop in the area, Borgin and Burke's. The butterfly on Harry's shoulder tapped his cheek. Harry nodded, approaching the shop's window, and peered through the glass. It was hard to make out anything inside the dimly lit shop. The human bones on the counter looked eerie in its bleached whiteness. Harry almost let out a gasp when the staring glass eyes swiveled towards his direction. A magnificent necklace of opals glittered under the single lit candle. He skimmed over the large black cabinet next to the necklace's showcase to examine the table that had a hangman's noose. Then he doubled back. The cabinet door was open a sliver, and a paper aeroplane was waving a wing at the opening. Harry took a deep breath. He had to enter the shop, but there was a bell on top of the door designed to alert the owners of any customers entering. Harry wondered if he should risk a freezing charm, but then the paper aeroplane at the cabinet flew to the top of the door and wrapped itself around the bell's clapper.
"Neat,"
Harry whispered. He opened the door and silently crept to the cabinet while keeping an eye on the counter. No one came out of the back room. Harry heard muffled sobbing coming out of the cabinet. He reached out to touch the handle. A hitched gasp filtered out when Harry's disembodied hand emerged from the folds of his cloak. Harry removed his cloak with his left hand and opened the cabinet door. He found a little girl covered in soot inside. Her dark hair was tied up in a ponytail, and she was wearing red football shorts with white boaters, a pale t-shirt with a broad horizontal green stripe across the chest and sleeves, and yellow Converse. She was crouching in fetal position in the corner and was peering at Harry over her knees. Her large chocolate brown eyes were enormous and looked exactly like Mr. Lestrade's.
"Don't be afraid,"
Harry whispered, leaning forward.
"I'm here to help you."
The girl shook her head frantically. She looked terrified, and there were dirty tear tracks on both of her cheeks. Harry reached out.
"Come on,"
he said encouragingly.
"I can take you back to your family."
The girl slapped his hand away and cowered further into the corner. Then she looked back where the paper butterfly fluttered over and touched her hand. Harry waited for her to take in the butterfly, which calmly flapped its wings.
"See? I'm not a bad person,"
said Harry, smiling. He reached out his hand again. This time the girl tentatively reached back. Her hands were cold and clammy when Harry grasped them. "Where's Daddy and Aunt Jackie?" the girl asked as she unfolded herself from the corner, trembling all over.
"They're a bit further away,"
said Harry. Harry checked the door. There were two people at the other side of the glass, and one of them was the very last person Harry wanted to meet in the middle of Borgin and Burke's holding hands with a strange girl. Draco Malfoy.
"Hide!"
Harry hissed. He quickly shot inside the cabinet, pushing the girl back into the corner, and wrapped his invisibility cloak around them. He reached back and closed the cabinet doors, but left a small crack to peer through. Seconds later, the bell clanged, and Malfoy stepped into the shop. Draco's father followed him shortly. Mr. Malfoy crossed the shop, looking lazily at the items on display, and rang a bell on the counter before turning to his son, saying, "Touch nothing, Draco." "I thought you were going to buy me a present," said Malfoy, who was reaching for a glass eye.
"I said I would buy you a racing broom,"
said Mr. Malfoy, drumming his fingers on the counter.
"What's the point of that if I'm not on the house team?"
said Malfoy, looking sulky and bad-tempered.
"Harry Potter got a Nimbus last year and special permission from Dumbledore so he could play for Gryffindor. He's not even that good, it's just because he's famous. Famous for having a stupid scar on his forehead." Malfoy bent down to examine a shelf full of skulls. Everyone thinks he's so clever. Wonderful Potter with his scar, and his phone, and his broomstick. You told me this at least a dozen times already, said Mr. Malfoy with a quelling look at his son. And I would remind you that it is not prudent to appear less than fond of Harry Potter, not when most of our kind regard him as the hero who made the Dark Lord disappear. Ah, Mr. Borgin.
A stooping man appeared behind the counter, smoothing his greasy hair back from his face.
Mr. Malfoy, what a pleasure to see you again,
said Mr. Borgin in a voice as
oily as his hair. Delighted. And young Mr. Malfoy, too charmed. How may I be of assistance?
This was a familiar conversation to Harry. He'd heard one very much like it the first time he used flu powder to go back home after meeting up with Neville at Halifax. He accidentally ended up in a shop in Nocturne Alley instead of the Leaky Cauldron. After he left the shop, which was full of iron bar cages holding very sinister-looking creatures, and looked around to find his way out, Harry noticed a man who could only be Draco's father in front of Borgin and Burke's. He had the same pale, pointed face and identical cold gray eyes. Harry overheard Mr. Malfoy and Mr. Burke haggling over something from the tiny break between two shops, which was where he hid himself. Harry later used Borgin and Burke's large stone fireplace to flew himself to the Leaky Cauldron. He kicked himself for it afterwards because Diagon Alley was only a 10-minute walk away. Suddenly, Harry realized Mr. Malfoy wasn't buying anything this time but selling.
Selling?
Said Mr. Borgin. The smile faded slightly from his face.
You have heard, of course, that the Ministry of Magic is conducting more raids,
said Mr. Malfoy, unfurling a roll of parchment.
I have a few, items at home that might embarrass me, if the Ministry were to call.
The Ministry wouldn't presume to trouble you, sir, surely.
Mr. Malfoy's lip curled.
I have not been visited yet. The name Malfoy still commands a certain respect, yet the Ministry grows ever more meddlesome. The rumors of a new Muggle Protection Act persist. No doubt that fleet Muggle-loving fool Arthur Weasley is behind it.
Another similar vein. Harry felt the same hot surge of anger. He felt the girl shudder against his chest.
And as you see, some of these poisons might make it appear...
I understand, sir, of course, said Mr. Borgin. Let me see.
Can I have that? Draco interrupted, pointing the withered hand on the cushion.
Ah, the Hand of Glory,
said Mr. Borgin, abandoning Mr. Malfoy's list and skipping over to Draco.
Insert a candle, and it gives light only to the beholder. Best friend of thieves and plunderers. Your son has fine taste, sir.
I hope my son will amount to more than a thief and a plunderer, Borgin,
said Mr. Malfoy coldly, and Mr. Borgin quickly backtracked.
No offence, sir, no offence meant.
Though if his grades don't pick up, that may indeed be all he is fit for,
said Mr. Malfoy more coldly still.
It's not my fault, retorted Draco. The teachers all have favourites, that Hermione Granger. I would have thought you'd be ashamed that a girl of no wizard family beat you in every exam,
snapped Mr. Malfoy. Harry was pleased to see Draco look both abashed and angry.
It's the same all over,
said Mr. Borgin in his oily voice.
Wizard blood is counting for less everywhere.
Not with me,
said Mr. Malfoy, his long nostrils flaring.
No, sir, not with me either,
said Mr. Borgin with a deep bow.
In that case, perhaps we can return to my list? I am in somewhat of a hurry, Borgin. I have important business elsewhere today.
They started to haggle. Harry watched nervously as Draco examined the objects for sale, getting ever so closer to the cabinet. Harry wrapped the invisibility cloak more securely around them as Draco turned away from the glass cases and stood before the cabinet. The girl started breathing in short hissing jets as Draco stretched out his hand for the handle.
Done,
said Mr. Malfoy.
Come, Draco.
Harry slowly let out the breath he was holding as Draco turned away. The girl let out a small whimper.
Good day to you, Mr. Borgin. I'll expect you at the manor tomorrow to pick up the goods.
They left. The moment the door had closed, Mr. Borgin dropped his oily manner.
Good day yourself, Mr. Malfoy, and if the stories are true, you haven't sold half of what's hidden in your manor.
Muttering darkly, Mr. Borgin disappeared into a back room. Harry waited for a minute in case he came back. Then quietly as he could, he opened the door again and slipped out of the cabinet, holding the girl's hand. Harry draped the cloak over and around them, walking across the inside displays and out of the shop door. Again, the paper aeroplane from earlier held on to the clapper to prevent the bell from ringing. The two of them walked quietly down the dingy alleyway, Harry in the lead. The girl clutched Harry's arm painfully as they walked past the shops, one of which had a nasty window display of shrunken heads. "Scared?" she mumbled.
"We're fine," said Harry in a low voice. "We just have to be quiet. This cloak makes us invisible, but not silent."
They trotted down the twisting street. A streetlight buzzed overhead. The sound of scurrying feet made the girl flinch. Harry kept his eyes fixed on the spot of sunlight gleaming above the rooftops.
"Almost there,"
Harry said encouragingly when the girl stumbled. But the girl just kept digging her fingernails into Harry's arm. Harry lowered his line of sight a bit and felt his heart leap when he saw the massive form of Hagrid the Hogwarts gamekeeper. He strode towards them, his beetle-black eyes half hidden under his thick, stormy eyebrows and his great bristling beard.
"That's Hagrid,"
said Harry quietly.
"He's okay."
Hagrid, of course, couldn't see them. Harry wanted to say hello, but he didn't think removing his cloak would be wise. So he moved out of the way and stood with his back against a building wall, the girl standing next to him. Hagrid walked past, growling under his breath.
"Aren't there any shops round here selling flesh-eating slug repellent?"
Harry resumed their trek back to Diagon Alley after Hagrid disappeared behind a turn. In a few minutes they were in Diagon Alley. Harry led the girl behind the wooden crates from earlier and threw off the cloak.
"Here we are,"
he said. The girl just stood looking scared and lost. Harry took out his wand from his inner jacket pocket and whispered, "Scourgify." The soot clinging to their clothes vanished. Harry carefully folded his invisibility cloak and stashed it and his wand back inside his jacket. Then he turned to the girl. "Sorry," she said suddenly. "I made a noise." Harry smiled.
"That's okay, Julia. You did well."
He pointed the brightly lit streets beyond the wooden crates.
"If you go down that street facing the white marble building," Harry explained, "you'll find the stone archway to the Leaky Cauldron on your left. Your dad and your family are there."
"How do you know my name?" Harry blinked. Didn't she remember seeing him at the bowling alley? But then Harry supposed Julia Lestrade probably had more important things to pay attention to than a scrawny little boy with messy black hair when her family reunited and reconciled after a huge freak out over magic.
"I met you before," said Harry, "and I know your dad. You have his eyes, you know."
Julia blushed. Then, as if on cue, a familiar rusty-sounding voice rang out from the distance.
"Julia!" "You better go," said Harry. "I'll see you at Hogwarts. My name is Harry."
Julia took a step forward, stumbled over a loose cobblestone, and clumsily navigated around the crates. She gave Harry one last look, then quickly darted into the street. Harry watched Julia run to the three tall men sprinting towards her. Then, remembering he'd promised to meet Ron and Hermione at Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor around this time, Harry went on his own way, but not before sending John a text. Found her, now heading to Fortescue's.
"Good job. Say that.
John Watson." Lestrade swept Julia into his embrace and held her tightly. Once he was sure she wasn't going to vanish. The world was right side up and he was breathing like a normal human being. Lestrade stopped trying to crush her to death.
"Oh my gosh," he breathed. "Never again. Never. Ever again. We're going to take the bus, or the car, or a bloody donkey if need be, but never flu powder. And I'm going to throw your uncles in front of a speeding train. I mean it."
Julia nodded fervently against his shoulder. She refused to let go of him when he put her down. She did, though, look around. "Where is Harry?" she asked. Lestrade looked around, too. The boy was nowhere to be found. "He's meeting up with his friends," said John, seemingly rematerializing out of the ether.
"They're getting ice cream."
Lestrade frowned.
"You're not worried?" "Should I be?"
asked John, sounding honestly puzzled. Lestrade sighed. He supposed it was different for John and Sherlock, who didn't raise Harry from infancy. The things they allowed Harry to do sometimes made his heart stop.
"Oh, fine," he grumbled. "So where do we start?"
"Robes," said Jeremy. He was closely followed by Jason, Jackie, and their father.
"I'd start with the books," said Jason. "I don't want to hear from soon-to-be dead men,"
Lestrade growled. "Sorry, Greg," said the Shin twins, sounding truly regretful.
"Sorry, Julia."
Julia snuck closer to Lestrade and mumbled, "It's okay."
"Money exchange first,"
said John.
"Wizards have their own currency, and shops here don't take muggle money, as they call it, even when they have a bank right down the street." "Does the bank take a card?"
asked Lestrade nervously. He forgot to go to the ATM, and he didn't have a lot of cash.
Electronics and magic generally don't mix, said Jacqueline gently. If you like, you can use Jeremy's old spell books and Jason's old school equipment. They're practically new anyway.
Hey! The twins protested. Why didn't you say so earlier? Lestrade exclaimed. Great! So just the robes, potion ingredients, quills, parchment, and the wand. Why quills, by the way? Can't you use blood rolls? I honestly have no good explanation for the quills, said Jeremy. Parchment is good for spells, so they have their place. But for note-taking, just stick to regular paper. Most teachers don't mind. Just make sure you use parchment for homework, Julia. The teachers are mind-bogglingly strict about that. You can use biros and pencils for note-taking, said Jason, but you'll have to practice quill writing. For exams, the teachers make the students use special quills. They won't accept anything else. Would have been nice to know this when we went shopping last year, sighed John. Parchment costs really add up. I know, said Jason, empathetically. And let's not even talk about the wand, okay? I understand why, but seriously. How much are we talking about? Lestrade asked, dreading the answer. I paid 17 galleons for Harry's, said John. That's about £85. Lestrade tried to not let his jaw drop. Christ. That's almost double the price of what we had to pay for, said Jason, outraged. Mr. Ollivander said it's more difficult to find the right materials these days, said John. Shrinking habitats and all that. I suppose there's a bit of brand pricing involved too. Ollivander is considered the best in the business. That's actually true, said Jeremy. He is the best. Jackie, who had been quietly watching them all, turned to Lestrade.
Greg, you have all of Cecilia's old things, don't you?
She asked. Yeah,
said Lestrade guardedly. Go through them. You might find her old wand.
Enormous, glorious relief swept over Lestrade. Oh, that would be great, he said fervently. What should I be looking for? Anything that looks like a wooden stick? Datewood and dragon heartstring, 12 inches, said Mr. Shen. The heartstring was taken from a well-aged oriental dragon. Its scales had turned gold from its initial red. Lestrade was fascinated. What about Harry's wand? Holly and phoenix feather, 11.5 inches, nice and supple, said John promptly. Nice, said Lestrade. Then he remembered something. Sir, why don't you have one? Yeah, I was wondering about that, said John. Mr. Shin didn't reply immediately. He stopped for a moment, and his unreadable expression turned mournful. Wands, as you know them, are unique to Europe, he said eventually. Where I come from, things are very different. How different? John asked. Mr. Shin didn't answer. In the end, he just walked away. His children, grandchild, Lestrade, and John watched him go. He's like that sometimes, said Jeremy. More so since Mom passed away. He doesn't even smile these days, agreed Jason.
Hey, Mrs. said Jackie. He was like that when my mother died. He only started smiling again when he met Shizuka.
Didn't know you guys were half-siblings,
said Lestrade. He'd only known one late and deeply lamented Miss Shin all his life. Cecilia and I were born from his first marriage, explained Jackie. Jason and Jeremy came 12 years later. Finally, the sons he wanted.
Hello, Jeremy protested. You're his favorite, Nuna.
I am not,
Jackie denied. Liar, shouted Jason. Meet you in an hour at Flourish and Blots, John said while the Shin siblings squabbled. Sure, said Lestrade. Go shoo. Find your husband. He's probably doing something that'll get him arrested. John saluted and took off. Lestrade turned to the school list. They should be okay now. Nothing could possibly go more wrong. What did I say about not offending people who could turn you into a toad? Growled John after the promised hour. John, Sherlock, and Harry's friends and their families, Lestrade and his extended family, and Hagrid were all in the Leaky Cauldron. The Grangers were shaking with fright. The Weasleys were in various states of fury, elation, disapproval, or worry. Sherlock, who was slouched in a wooden chair, kept massaging his temples, looking dazed and confused. He'd been like that since an unknown spell hit him squarely in the face at the bookstore. I can't remember, he said. This is not possible. I don't forget things unless I delete them. John looked concerned in an instant. What do you remember? We met up Harry at that ice cream palace, said Sherlock, frowning. Got parchment and quills, then we headed to Flourish and Blots. There was a book signing going on. So far so good, said John. That Lockhart character, Sherlock muttered. You with a Yeti, he couldn't have written it. Or rather, he couldn't have done what was written in it. Yes, you made a insulting comment about his skin not matching a person who supposedly spent a year in the Himalayas. Not enough tan, you said.
He could have lost the tan,
Hermione Granger argued. Miss Weasley nodded furiously. After spending a year as close to the sun as terrestrially possible, with all that snow reflecting UV light, doubtful, Sherlock sneered. Not to mention, it's obvious the man hardly ever left the country. Just look at his pampered skin and manicured fingers. He's a fake.
Sherlock spat out the last word like a curse. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, John and Lestrade, didn't even blink at his breathtakingly rude deductions, as they were very much used to it. The rest of the Weasleys and Grangers who weren't used to it stared at Sherlock as though they couldn't believe someone like him existed. The Shin family were too stoic to express anything. Hagrid, on the other hand, snorted in agreement, which apparently surprised the children.
Moving on,
Sighed John.
What else do you remember? Impromptu photo shoot and to Malfoy's,
said Sherlock. Then, in a terrifyingly accurate imitation of Lucius Malfoy, he said,
Whoa, Arthur Weasley.
Mr. Weasley turned dark red in remembrance.
Insult.
Sherlock went on, flapping his hands around like he was tapping invisible buttons.
Arthur, you threw Cauldron at him. Hagrid, you pulled them apart. John, I believe you twisted Lucius Malfoy's arm behind his back and dropped him to his knees.
Oh, you remembered that part, said John mildly. That was so cool, Fred shouted. God, you teach us. Ron pleaded.
Sorry, said John. You guys are a bit too young.
Aww, the younger Weasley children whined.
Not worried about assault charges,
asked Lestrade, grinning.
Who's going to believe him?
John scoffed.
I'm just a lonely common muggle, and I wear a cardigan.
All the Weasleys except Percy and Miss Weasley plus Jeremy and Jason roared with laughter. Hagrid chuckled a bit before turning serious.
You should have ignored him, John,
said Hagrid.
I expect Lucius Malfoy would start plotting to get back at you. They're not into the court of whole family. Everyone knows that. No Malfoy's worth listening to. But blood, that's what it is.
Oh, the irony,
said Sherlock, his voice dripping with sarcasm.
So is that it? Asked John. You remember none of the specifics? Just a vague sense that insults were being thrown. No crystal clear memory of the exact wording and tone and gestures as you normally do. Of course I remember that, snapped Sherlock irritably.
Then he stood up and demonstrated, accurately mimicking the way Malfoy Sr. reached down and extracted Ginny Weasley's very old, very battered copy of A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration from her cauldron and reciting Malfoy Sr.'s words exactly in the same tone he used. He even roped Arthur Weasley to do his cauldron-throwing attack at him so he could complete Mr. Malfoy's final insult of thrusting the Transfiguration book to Ginny with a malicious comment that it was best her father could do for her.
I don't know if I should admire your acting or punch you in face for embarrassing Arthur,
said John when Sherlock was done.
Thank you for humouring my idiot husband, Arthur.
Mr. Weasley was still very red when he mumbled it was fine.
Seems like your memory is fine to me, John remarked. That's exactly how I remember it too. Well, except you bending down to check Ginny's cauldron, but you remember that, don't you? Obviously, but there's a gap, shouted Sherlock, lashing out. There's a gap in my short-term storage, and I can't figure out what it is. God, is this how it is for you ordinary people? It's intolerable. Welcome to the club, Lestrade muttered. Definitely a memory charm, John asked of Mr. Weasley while Sherlock started to pace. Looks like it, said Mr. Weasley, frowning. Placidity and inability to focus are common symptoms of a person whose memory has been modified. I'm actually surprised Sherlock is aware he forgot something. A successful memory charm would have taken care of that. No one but his older brother beats him when it comes to keeping his mind organized, said John. Can you lift it? Sorry, John, Mr. Weasley apologized. Removing the charm might actually harm him more. John instantly turned expressionless. Lestrade knew the look. John was feeling murderous. I don't like this, John said flatly. Why would someone put a memory charm on him? In the middle of Diagon Alley, where there's plenty of people to see. I know you lot are pretty liberal about the memory charms, but we fall in the grey area. Plus, as far as we know, Sherlock didn't see anything that would breach your statute of secrecy. I don't know, and that troubles me too, said Mr. Weasley. I'll look into this, John, I promise. Everyone got ready to go home afterwards. Lestrade thanked Jackie again for keeping her twin brother's spellbooks and school equipment in storage. They'd left Hogwarts 3 years ago, so their old spellbooks were still the correct editions. And I'll definitely look for Cecilia's old wand, said Lestrade. "I still can't believe they're so expensive."
It is one of the most important things for a magical person to have,
said Jackie blandly.
"And Ollivander is the best in the business," said Jeremy. "He's worth every penny, Greg."
Lestrade just grunted. How was he supposed to know?
"You know," said Jason carefully, like he was negotiating difficult terrain, "we don't mind paying for—" "No, it's okay, you've done enough," said Lestrade. "Nice meeting all of you."
He left with Julia. Lestrade kept a cheerful conversation going, saying how nice it was to meet other young witches going to Hogwarts. Hermione Granger sounded quite clever, and didn't Ginny Weasley seem nice? Julia nodded non-committally, but that was fine. If Julia really didn't want to go, she'd say so.
Is Harry famous?
Julia wondered out loud. Lestrade wondered about that too. The way Lockhart and the press reacted definitely implied this. The Baker Street Pratts said nothing of the sort, but that was to be expected. But his magical in-laws refused to comment even when he pressed.
"Guess we'll just have to find out," said Lestrade. "Chin up and don't give up, yeah?"